Good afternoon. This is Media Center Ukraine, Odesa. We continue for today. Our current guest is Vira Yastrebova, who will speak about the violation of human rights on the territories occupied by the Russian army. Good afternoon. Now I would like to briefly tell about what I'm going to cover today during the briefing. And these briefings have become regular, and the audience of the center knows what is happening now, today, or recently on the temporarily occupied territories. But today, I would like to talk about the changes that we observe on the temporarily occupied territories, how the Russian Federation oppresses the local population, and what Ukrainians are now face there. This includes the filtration of the local population, the continued compulsory passporting, mobilization, and now it covers young people, students on the temporarily occupied territories, passporting of children who then deported. And today we are going also to discuss deportation. Unfortunately, it is still ongoing, and still there are the effects of the deported children from the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. Filtration of the local population, how it is organized, and how the Russian Federation organizes its activities. The occupiers increased the filtering of people in the temporarily occupied territories in March-May 2023. More than 1,000 people were detained, namely 1,043 people were detained. Arrests are carried out by the Russian Guard, which performs de facto the functions of the Gestapo. This is a secret police, and filtering measures of illegal detentions, interrogations of people on the temporarily occupied territories. Filtration measures also involve the FSB and the military police of the Russian Federation. They detain locals at the internal checkpoints. They examine their documents, telephones, and everything they believe suspicious. A person can be detained right away. To imprison people who do not pass the filtration, the occupiers created correctional centers where people are involved in forced labor. These centers are managed by the Federal Service of Imprisonment of the Russian Federation, FSIN of the Russian Federation. Filtration measures are aimed at finding a pro-Ukrainian population that supports Ukraine and that looks forward of Ukrainian counteroffensive. The occupiers have established the whole system of denunciations against people who speak about their support of Ukraine. De facto, through the mentioned parties, FSB, Russian Guard, illegal detention of people is carried out on the temporarily occupied territories. These people are interrogated, and these people are also offered to avoid punishment. And they also include people in their network of denunciators. These people are recruited in exchange of sparing it for tortures. Those people who watch Ukrainian news, those who support Ukraine, and those who do not want to acknowledge occupiers as their leadership. As for compulsory passporting, unfortunately, the process is ongoing. We received this information from the people on the temporarily occupied territories. People are forced to renounce Ukrainian citizenship. So before, when we talked about compulsory passporting, people were issued passports of quasi-formations and then passports of the Russian Federation. But our enemy has changed its tactics. Now Russian passports are issued where the territory of Ukraine, that they believe the territory of Russian Federation is mentioned. Those people who do not want to gain Russian passports are deported to remote areas of the Russian Federation. Using the map of the Compatriot program, the Russian Federation deport Ukrainians to the remote areas of the Russian Federation, and there are some limitations where these people cannot be deported, like St. Petersburg, Leningradska Oblast, Moscow district. So it is prohibited to deport Ukrainians there. As for a compulsory mobilization, unfortunately, the Russian Federation and the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine continue mobilizing the students, the full-time students there. It was reported by the relatives of the students, and unfortunately, these are not individual cases. So-called Minister of Education of DNR, Donetsk People's Republic, publicly confirmed this information. Students are invited to military commissariats and then enrolled as volunteers and sent to the front line. Occupying administration, they somehow try to encourage students, young people. They say that they should address commissariats, and after that they will be able to continue their studies. So we can see cynical involvement of the local population. Russian Federation, during the compulsory mobilization of the first wave, killed parents of these children, and now they mobilize the children. Issuing of passports to children, the occupiers introduced separate passporting of orphan children through appointed guardians. For the children, applications are submitted to the Migration Service of the Russian Federation. These applications also envisaged the renouncing of the Ukrainian citizenship, and children receive Russian documents. As for deportation of children, we should know that after the order of the International Criminal Court against Putin and Belova in March this year, the deportation was not stopped, but the enemy has changed the tactics. What information we've managed to obtain? Their strategy involves changes in groups. So for them to make it simpler to disperse these children over the territory of the Russian Federation, to make it more difficult to identify the whereabouts of the children deported from the territory of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. In summer, we can see the increased number of groups of children. Children are allegedly invited to some recreational activities, and then parents lost contact with their children. So these children are deported. And parents now understand that those people who were invited to recreation to the Russian Federation did not come back to their families. And parents are unwilling to allow their children to go there. But there is the pressure put on the parents and they allow their children to go there, to go to so-called summer camps, but unfortunately they also lose contact with their children. These are kind of deportation tours for small Ukrainians on the occupied territories continue, unfortunately. As for social and economic situation, it is very difficult, extremely difficult. There is non-payment of wages in the occupied territories. In general, in the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, the occupiers do not pay salaries to the miners, and the debt has already grown to $24 million. In the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, there is a 3-month debt. There is also debt in wages for workers of hospitals and so-called universities. So even those who are involved now in occupiers' activities do not receive wages or salaries. Unfortunately, the situation in the occupied territories is deteriorated by looters. And looters in Russia are law enforcement structures. And in the occupied territories, they are now the groups involving representatives of the police, Russian Guard Migration Service that organize raids to detain people following denunciations with the aim of identifying helpers of the enemy, as they call them. Moreover, private property, which is still there on the occupied territory, is now occupied by temporary administrations that are comprised of the Russian citizens. So this is a signal to the business there. If businessmen believe that they will be able to preserve their property, unfortunately, this is not the case. Health is in danger, life is in danger, and the Ukrainian future is also endangered by the deportation of children. And they also want to deprive people of their property that, unfortunately, everything will be taken away there. This is briefly about the main topics and the main challenges the population of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine face. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your report, Michael. Do you have any questions? Michael Vasura, Newsweek Journal. And do you see the changes in the settlements closer to the front line when the people are voluntarily or compulsorily evacuated from the zones where the counteroffensive of Ukrainian forces could be expected? And as for the evacuation that you've mentioned, we see this is not an evacuation, but this is deportation, because unfortunately, this deportation aims at the strata of population or citizens who try to continue their struggle. And these people are deported from their houses to prisons, or to the Russian Federation. That's why there is no evacuation there. I believe that the enemy that has temporarily occupied our territories uses children as the life shield. They are not interested in preserving life of Ukrainians. Hopefully, I was able to answer your question. As for the deportation, does it cover those people who are on the territories that have been occupied since 2014, so-called Luhansk, Donetsk People's Republics and Crimea, or this is mainly about the people in Kherson, Donetsk, Zaporizhia Oblast who were not under occupation before the last year? So I would offer a different classification, the deportation of adults and deportation of children. As for the deportation of adults, deported those are people who undergo filtration camps. Unfortunately, now we can observe the cases of deportation on the territories that are under occupation before 2021 and after 2022 and after 2022. Unfortunately, we can see the impact of the local population. We can see the labor migration because the enterprises are closed, and people were forced to leave the temporarily occupied territories because they could not work there anymore, and they could not earn money to support their families. So de facto, on the territories that were occupied before 2022, we see a significant substitution of the local population, which is actively supported by the government of the Russian Federation and the occupation regime, because the Russian Federation is interested in canceling the historical memory of people. Not to have the Ukrainians that can compare how they lived before the full-scale invasion, before 2014 when the occupation started. Because those Ukrainians remember what salaries they got, the infrastructure they had, and the peaceful life. If we do not stop the invasion, they will continue their campaign aiming at substitution of the local population. They now actively involve the workers from the construction area, from the Russian Federation, who are eager to come to the Ukrainian territories. There is additional sources of financing of these people. They are also awarded by the Russian Federation. And when we say that this is only Putin's war, I'd like to say that this is also the war of Putin's minions, Putin's proxies, who are ready to live in the houses of Ukrainians who were either killed or were forced to leave because of the war, including the workers who follow the orders of the Chamber Ombudsman and create lists for further deportation of children, and who help to make this crime the mass-scale one. A lot of people are involved in this crime. And I have the question about the compulsory mobilized students. Do you know how many people and from what areas? This is mainly about the territories of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, where they have a quite stable tool of management, so to say. And this is a massive campaign on the territories who were occupied after the start of the full-scale aggression. And now this is the time of summer holidays, summer vacations, and all those students who study full-day have been sent to so-called military commissariats, even if these students are under 18. So this is not like an attempt to persuade them. This is in order for them to join the Russian forces, and only after that they will be able to get the possibility to continue their studies. And we understand that this is one more step of the Russian Federation to kill those children whose parents had been already killed, to those children whose parents were compulsory deported or mobilized in February, in March, in April, when those people were sent to the front line to fight against Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you for the briefing. We hope that the next time when you come here to our media center, we will be able, we'll have more time to discuss the violation of human rights in the temporarily occupied territories in more details. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. The next briefing will take place in 15 minutes. That will be the briefing of Natalia Humenyuk, head of the Joint Coordination Press Center of the Defense Forces of the southern Ukraine. This will be dedicated to blown up dam of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station. At noon, we will have briefing about the condition of the bomb shelters in the city of Odesa and in Odesa region. And at 12:40, we will have with us online Mr. Balinsky, ecologist, environmentalist, who will share more details about the consequences of such a catastrophic decision.